Next on the roster is Jim, who's been doing this for quite some time and has gathered some wisdom along the way, which he's going to impart upon us now. And some of that, no doubt, will be relating to the book that he co-authored recently on bamboo, which I have read and it's very interesting.
Nothing on bamboo on this one, I'm afraid. Which I know is a bit of a shock to the rest of you, because you probably think I'm just a bamboo man. So I should actually have guessed that Philip's presentation would be very comprehensive, so there's lots of stuff in mine that covers the same ground. So thanks very much. So I'll try and sort of like whiz through it, the bits that kind of are too repetitive. So I've been stuck with learning to avoid the pitfalls, building on our experience. So I just really wanted to talk about where we've come as an industry. So there's a little bit of history there, some of which Philip has already dealt with. We talk about a Japanese knotweed industry. It's only really about 20 years old. So it's still sort of pretty new. And during the course of those 20 years, we've seen a number of approaches change as we've developed with our experience and research. And I'm sure those of us who've been in the business for most of those 20 years will know that if we go back to the first decade of this century, there were some really dodgy methodologies around. Fortunately, we've moved beyond sort of most of those. So we are still learning. So we've still got new research. We've still got new things to take on board. And I think the important thing as an industry is to be open to those. It's very easy to get this whole idea of this is what we've always done, so this is what we're going to do. But we need to be able to open to change. And as an industry, that has happened, particularly in the last 10 years. So really, I just want to talk, as I say, about how far we've come, what we've learned to change, and perhaps throw in a couple of thoughts about where we could be going. But we have heard quite a lot about where we could be going from other speakers. So let's have a look. Quick history lesson. So a long time ago, and again, sorry, that's the wrong slide. Before 2000. There wasn't a knotweed industry. There were people out there who were dealing with Japanese knotweed, but it was not the core part of their business. Now, there was a book that was published by a Lois Child and a Max Wade. I've no idea who they are. Max, you get any idea what happened to them? Probably down McDonald's now or something. This book basically became the Bible for anybody who wanted to deal with knotweed. So 2000 to 2008, we saw the birth of the knotweed industry. We saw companies who were making knotweed the core part of their business. And every single one of them had a copy of that book on their bookshelf. During this period, we also saw the media doing its very measured response to Japanese knotweed, as we have already heard that they're also doing in Sweden. Which then kind of got lots of people jumping on the bandwagon. We had the Environment Agency during this period release their code of practice to try and to establish best practice and try and move some of these aforementioned dodgy practices out of the way. And then it all went pear-shaped. We had a recession. Construction just was hit so badly, and that affected sort of like a number of companies who were just doing development sites. So a number of those companies went under, but some of those were ones doing the dodgy stuff, so that was good. After that, we really, as you've heard sort of from Philip, mortgage lenders got just basically lost confidence in the knotweed industry, and then they started refusing to lend on any properties that had knotweed on it or anywhere near it. And a need for some sort of independent overview was identified. So in 2012, we had two things happen. We had the new RICS guidance, and we had the formation of the PCA Invasive Weed Control Group. And that improved things. In 2013, you had the Council of Mortgage Lenders. They issued a statement on lending on knotweed properties, where they stipulated what they kind of wanted to see in place, but they were beginning to lend on these properties again. So that helped sort of like move things forward. And then since then, the knotweed industry is back and it's bigger than ever, and as we can see. And it seems like now we're getting practically every week there's a new knotweed company appearing somewhere. Now, the thing I really enjoyed during Philip's talk was watching Dan just kind of disappear into his seat as every single photograph of him appeared on the screen, which was quite amusing. But I have to talk about Dan because 2012, 2013 was when Dan and his team began the largest and longest running field-based assessment of knotweed treatment methods. It was the biggest in the world. And in 2018, we had the first published findings, and there have been sort of like more since. And I don't feel that the work that Dan and his team do can be sort of I can't stress it enough, really. I think because we have all learnt so much from what he's managed to find. Because he's given us some results that reinforced what we were thinking, but he's also given us results that we found surprising, and I just want to go through sort of like some of those things. So his findings were what most of us were thinking anyway, that glyphosate, in which if you're going to be using herbicide, it is the most effective one that we've got available in this country. Over-applying herbicide doesn't produce greater control. Cutting stems in the summer and then doing a treatment in the autumn doesn't improve the control. It doesn't really sort of contribute that much to it. You've got early season treatments aren't just a bit of a waste of time. They actually reduce the effectiveness of the later autumn treatments. Stem injection, there was a lot of companies who just, their answer to everything was stem injection. And as Dan found, it used around 15 times more herbicide than foliar application. It's more labor intensive, and this is the really crucial one, didn't produce greater control. And then physical disruption of the plants, again, is not necessarily any effective. In fact, quite often it was less effective. So the use of glyphosate in the autumn was the most effective time, which is again something we were always sort of fairly sure of, but it was good to have that reinforced. Covering knotweed with the root barrier doesn't kill it, contains it, but it won't kill it because the reserves are just too well established with knotweed. And then the physical methods that we often saw people doing, particularly sort of members of the public, were sort of hand pulling, hand digging, mowing, strimming. All that does is just spread it around. It doesn't sort of give you any great control. So the crux of Dan's research really is what we've been hearing about quite a lot today, about invasive weed management. And it's basically do less with more. So it's about using less herbicide, gaining more control. So one of the other things that we often saw, and I have to admit we are still seeing in some areas, in some contractors, there's this rigid idea of 3 years treatment program. And what Dan's research reinforced is 3 years treatment program will not work on every site. It's not a one-size-fits-all. The length of program is going to vary depending on the size of knotweed. You're not going to control that in 3 years. That is just not going to happen. You will be able to limit it, but you're not going to get to the end of that program in 3 years. So the knotweed that size, you're probably going to be looking at 7, possibly 10 years. And the timing of the treatments is crucial. And it's not just the size of the stand, it's where it is as well. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So we saw lots of changes that were brought in, sort of learning from this research, learning from our own experience. We saw that 3 treatments a year that a lot of people were doing as standard was not actually that effective. And so it's better to just have one. If you are going to have a second one sort of in the summer, then really needs to be sort of like larger areas. If you've got a very small area, just 2 treatments a year is going to be too much. The spring treatments are counterproductive. So if you're still doing spring treatments, don't. Stem injection, it's a useful tool, but it shouldn't be a standard. It leads to the possibility of overuse of herbicide, which can in turn lead to a greater risk of dormancy. So minimize herbicide use. If you're putting the herbicide on and it's just pouring off the leaves, stop spraying, because you're not doing anything. You're not achieving more control. You're just using more product, wasting more product. And cut and fill, which again, a lot of contractors previously were using a lot, where they cut it down and you treat directly into the cut stumps. Well, Dan found that that wasn't more effective and actually could be quite counterproductive. So, that's what we've learned. No one size fits all. Each site needs to be taken its own merits. Large stands will take longer to control. Now, this is an interesting one that some people haven't quite cottoned onto yet. Stands in nutrient-rich ground, such as by watercourses, will take longer to control. However long you think that control will take, if it's in sort of really nutrient-rich ground, double the duration of your treatment program, because you're still going to be treating it, because it's just got so much help sort of in the ground. And the same issue if you've got stands partially covered by hard landscape. So you've got rhizomes which are protected, aren't getting herbicide into them. So unless you can get that hard landscape out of the way, then you're probably going to be just continually monitoring and dealing with the bits that come up around the outside. Terminology is pretty key, and we've already heard a little bit before about eradication. Now, John Barton, who's back there, a few years ago was asked by the PCA to do a definition of eradication in terms of Japanese knotweed. It's a really good definition. If you haven't read it, try and track it down. Basically, if it's still in the ground, it's not been eradicated, because it's still in the ground. And if there is a possibility that there is even a tiny bit of it still viable, then it's not eradicated. So we've definitely seen over the last 3 or 4 years this whole idea of herbicides treatment eradication disappearing out the window and changing that terminology. And so we talk about control. Herbicide treatment is control. If you dig it up, it's eradication. If it's herbicide treatment, you're controlling it. It's an important distinction. And it's an important distinction because control programs have long-term implications in terms of what's going to happen with the site afterwards. Because if dormant rhizome is present and it's not going to sort of, it's attached to dead rhizome, it hasn't got the energy to come up. If it's left where it is, eventually it will die. But if you disturb that ground, then you can effectively result to, you've got some more growth coming up. Now, I'm just going to very, very quickly, there was a point that I really wanted to make about this, and I'm really glad actually that Philip made it, so I'm not going to sort of like labour it. But this talk was called Learning to Avoid the Pitfalls, and there is a potential pitfall, and I've already seen reports where people are doing this. The old RICS categories, they were cut and dried. It was a 4, it was a 3, whatever it was. The new ones, it's not down to us to say what the category is, and that is a really dangerous pitfall, as Philip said. So to move that along, there's actually what the guidance says. It's about the valuers and the mortgage lenders. They're the ones that make the decision. It's not for knotweed practitioners. We should not ever in our survey reports be saying this is a management category B, because you are opening yourself up for potential legal problems in the future if a surveyor disagrees with you. What we can do is we can advise, we can say what we think it might be, we can sort of help, let's provide information to allow a valuer to make sort of a judgment, but we can't categorically say what the category is anymore. So really don't do that, because you're going to open yourself up to all sorts of problems if, as Philip said, you end up disagreeing with the decision that's eventually made by the valuer. So, new learning opportunities. Where do we go from here? how can we profitize long-term management? So there are a number of things, and I realized when I was reading through this earlier, a really obvious one, especially considering what seems to be my specialist subject that I didn't put on there, is opening up to other invasive species, and so thinking beyond knotweed. We already do extended guarantees, and so you end up extending the period of management, period of monitoring on the site. Revegetation, we've heard sort of a little bit about that. That's something that we can consider a lot more, and for something to give us sort of like more management of a site, longer management of a site. Sorry, throat's going. Also, being open to alternative methodologies. We've heard already about sort of a lot of the alternatives aren't really good alternatives, but that doesn't mean that there won't be other alternatives that might turn out to be good alternatives. So we've got to be open to that. It's going back to that whole not doing the same thing we've always done because that's how we've always done it. But very, very important part of that, we need these alternative methodologies to be backed up by science, by research, and we need to have proper data that gives us confidence in those methodologies. So just really sort of wind up, knotweed industry, it's developed a lot over the past couple of decades. We've been learning from site experience, and the PCA has been a fantastic forum for sharing some of that. Scientific research, I'm looking at Dan again, and we've adapted methodologies as a result of that, and that's where we need to keep going to keep our confidence in the industry. And as we move forward, we have a responsibility to the industry and to our clients to be open to new ideas and to minimize our impact on the environment, choose the appropriate methodologies in accordance with the good old buzz phrase right now, integrated weed management. And something that, on an aside, you can really tell how well trained the PCA have got me, because of doing sort of the courses and things for them, that I've ended up doing the presentation on a PCA template. Yeah, so that's why it's got that on the end. So thank you very much.